We disagree with Bill Maher on an awful lot, but last Friday on his HBO show, he did something that took some courage. He spoke plainly about where the coronavirus came from.
We're barely 4 months into this pandemic, and the wet markets in China, the ones where exotic animals are sold and consumed, are already starting to reopen. So when someone says, what if people hear Chinese virus and blame China? The answer is we should blame China. We can't afford the luxury anymore of non-judginess towards a country with habits that kill millions of people everywhere.
So everything you just heard is factually true, so naturally the Daily Beast, which is run by the dumbest and worst people in the world, summed it up this way, quote, Bill Maher goes on despicably racist rant against China over coronavirus. China, the most racist country in the world. China, the country in which the Communist Party has now imposed tight new restrictions on any research into how exactly the coronavirus began. So in effect, our media are freely choosing to follow the directives of the Chinese Communist Party. Don't ask any questions that might make China look bad, otherwise you're racist. That said, wet markets may not be the actual origin of the coronavirus. In fact, there's quite a bit of evidence quickly accumulating that the wet market is not where it came from. The Wuhan Institute of Virology is another contender for that. Now, new reporting reveals that the lab's research on bats was funded in part from a $3.7 million grant from the U.S. government. Heard anything more perverse than that today? Probably not. Gordon Chang is the author of The Coming Collapse of China, and he joins us tonight. Gordon, thanks so much for coming on. So China has banned or tightly restricted further research into the origins of this global pandemic. Why would they do something like that, do you think?
I think because Beijing is very worried about how this disease started, because there's growing evidence, as you point out, that this was an accidental release from either the Wuhan Institute of Virology, which is a P4 biosafety lab, or a sister institution, which is about 20 miles down the road. So I think that they really want to make sure that people do not understand where this comes from. And by the way, Tucker, they've done a lot of work over the last several months to make sure that the foreign community doesn't get the opportunity to study the origins of this outbreak in Wuhan.
Do you think that's one of the reasons that early samples of the virus were destroyed under orders from the Chinese government?
I'm sure that was the case. That happened on January 3, when China's National Health Commission ordered the authorities in Wuhan to destroy samples. That's occurred on a number of other occasions, we understand. And we've seen right now, over the last 7-8 days, new controls on scientific research. Every paper on COVID-19, on the origins of it, now must be approved in Beijing before they're published. And that's a real indication, as Chinese scientists fear, and they in fact fear, that this is going to be political controls on their research.
So given that the data coming out of China are to some extent, and we don't know the extent, but to some extent are weighted by political considerations, what do you make of our health authorities freely using those data and quoting them when they explain their policies to us? Does that make sense?
No, it doesn't, but it's sort of understandable. We heard Dr. Bricks 2 Tuesdays ago say when they looked at the data from China, new infections, transmissibility, all the rest of it, they thought this was no worse than SARS. And so they reasonably thought that they did not need to take certain precautions. Well, as it turned out, when Dr. Bricks and others saw what was happening in Spain and Italy, they realized that the data from China was seriously flawed, that it underestimated the number of cases. And that's when I think there probably was a fair amount of panic in the White House about what had happened, because we had, in fact, not taken precautions because of what China told us.
I would think that the many people in our country in the upper echelons who've collaborated with China over the years would be nervous watching this, because people are starting to figure out what exactly is happening to us. Gordon Chang, great to see you tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Tucker.